So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Today is Easter Monday. So, I hope you had a good Easter holidays. The past few weeks, I was in Germany visiting one of my gurus. He lives in Germany. He has been living in Germany for over the past 50 years. And once every year during the Easter holidays, then Rinpoche would give teachings for a week. And it was very nice. We had one senior Lama visiting from India, of course, to attend the teachings. And we also had about 20 Singaporeans also attended the teachings, and from many different countries, from Europe, like that. So it was a wonderful gathering. And then yesterday the teachings finished in the morning. We had lunch, and then two of our Dutch friends were kind enough to drive Kelsang, my friend here. He's in his room right now. They were kind enough to drive the two of us here, and now here I am. And first of all, I want to thank you for coming here, because I know it's Easter Monday, right? But thank you for coming. And the subject, and Martin, as you were talking, you mentioned in your opening remarks that Dharma is easier to practice when one is on the cushion than actually being engaged with the world, being engaged with the community. And I am someone who spends most of his time on the cushion. But of course, I do get my chances to interact with others. So I think all of us here in this room, we have somehow met the Dharma, right? There's something about the Buddha's teachings that has drawn us, that interests us, that inspires us. So this is something we have to, I think, reflect on from time to time when it comes to living, when it comes to sharing, when it comes to sharing this with others, when it comes to sharing our world, so to speak, this space in which we not only exist, but also others exist as well, right? So we have to live as a community as a Sangha. This is why at the time of taking refuge, we do not only take refuge in the Buddha or the Dharma, but we also need the Sangha. We need a support system. This is so important. And it would be selfish to expect others to be our support. If we only expect that, I think that would be somewhat selfish. Just as we would like support, we also have to give support as well. This is very important. So, this idea of living in harmony with others, I think, is very important in our practice, in our mental development. This is very important. Because as you have just said, Martin, if we simply isolate ourselves from others and in the comfort of our private space, on a comfortable cushion or the bed, seat, whatever, in our comfort zone, when we are in our comfort zone, then it may seem all is well. It may seem very easy. It may seem very easy to practice the Dharma, right? When we are in our comfort zone. But when we go out of that, when we are not in our private space anymore, that's when things can become challenging, right? So we have to prepare ourselves for such scenarios. This is very important. And we don't necessarily, when I say prepare, doesn't mean that we have to anticipate all different sort of situations and then prepare for those situations. We don't need to do that. I think one general approach is that we have to, just as we had learned through our kind teachers, for example, the Lamrim teachings, right? Or Bodhisattva Chayavatara. What we have learned in those teachings is what we need to practice in relation to others. So we have to think it like this. We have to view others as our support. When I say others, let us not talk of one specific community, but others in general. For example, in the four opponent powers, the power of reliance, refuge, and bodhicitta, right? So bodhicitta is so important. It is our support. And for bodhicitta, obviously, unconditional love, unconditional compassion for others is the basis of bodhicitta. So therefore, in order to really cultivate these bodhicitta or great compassion, we have to rely on others. It is only through the kindness, it is only through the reliance on others, that we will be able to generate these mental states. So, this is how I think we have to see others, see the other person in this way. And then, as a Dharma community, then it is even more important. For example, it is said that when the Buddha gave permission to, of course, with the ordination, first it was the Buddha who was ordaining the Sangha, right? But later on, he gave permission for others to also ordain others as well, right? And one of the reasons for that was that in the Sangha, there were people who were neglected due to old age, sicknesses, and so forth. And this became a source of concern. And later then the Buddha said, now you can ordain others. He gave permission to the senior monks and nuns in the order and he gave them permission to give them ordination vows. And one of the responsibilities he gave to the senior ones was that once you ordain them, then they are in a way your responsibility. That you must take care of them, you must give them the instructions, the guidelines, and when they face hardships, physically or mentally, then one must, the Kempo, or like something like the ordaining Sangha member has to take responsibility and give them support. So this was a way of sustaining the Sangha. Because if no one takes responsibility, then how can you have a community, right? So I think this is very important. Recently, Ling Chödrö Rinpoche was visiting the Netherlands here, and I heard that Rinpoche said that the centers in the West is in a way like a Western monastery or Western nunnery, something like this, right? So not simply a place where people just get together and listen to the teachings and then go their own ways, not just that. If the center has to sustain long term, then it is important that the members, the students, everyone, that they develop a sense of community, a sense of, I think, endearing spirit. I don't even know if that's a correct word, is it? Or something like, as we say, like a family, there has to be a sense, there has to be a feeling like you're part of the same family, right? So this is very important. And then, when I see these things like, we have to be compassionate, we have to live together like a family, we have to support each other, it all sounds very nice, right? It all sounds very idealistic. But then we have to think about, what are the challenges in doing exactly that? What are the challenges? And the challenges are many, I'm sure. But ideally, when you have a society that is comprised of individuals who follow the teachings of the Buddha and who follow Bodhisattva Charyavatara, then it should be really smooth. Right? Ideally. But such is our tendency, our preoccupation, that despite our background in the Dharma, despite hearing the teachings of the Buddha, despite hearing these, receiving teachings and then spending some time or spending much effort in contemplation of the meanings of these wonderful teachings, we face many challenges, right? So it is something like a work in progress. This is really where this is like the level of our mind right now, right? So it's very important, I think, to first recognize that, to accept that, and as a community, for example, there are bound to be some frictions. This happens, of course, not only in Dharma centers, but very much in the monasteries as well, in the Tibetan monasteries as well. Not only in India, but also in Tibet. It has always existed. And also it can be traced back to the times of the Buddha, that there were frictions even within the Buddha Sangha during the lifetime of the Buddha, right? So therefore he made rules, things like that. And having problems is perfectly fine. Then at least we have a basis to work on, right? So this is good. It gives us a reason. It gives us a reason to why we should work together. When we face some challenges. Oh. Thank you. Problem solved. For some problems, you just have to move something, and then it goes away, right? Yes. But for other problems, it's far more complicated, right? That's what you would think I would say, but I don't think that is the case. I think the other problems is quite similar to just this situation. You just have to move it, right? So similarly, I think when we have some friction with our fellow human beings, I think we have to move something in our mind, right? We have to move something. So just like this, it wasn't in the right place, therefore it was creating some, this frequency, these problems. So likewise, if you don't put the things in our mental room, in our mind space, if you don't arrange things in a good way, then of course it will create some frequency, So something like this. our way of viewing fellow human beings, I think, is very important. We really have to try to go to the root of our problems, and this root of the problem is something that you all have heard many times over in the Loenen teachings, in the Lojong teachings, right? So we have to change our viewpoint, our point of view. Right now we are coming from a place of, we have a certain view of looking. We have a certain way of seeing ourselves among others, right? And sometimes if we can modify that view, that way of seeing the world view, if we can modify, if we sort of tweak that, then I think it helps us down the road. It will help us for sure. This is very important, how we see ourselves in relation to others. This is, I think, number one, very important. And then as Mahayana Buddhists, our main practice is the 6 perfections. There's no doubt about that, right? And with the 6 perfections, the first is, of course, the practice of generosity. How can we unconditionally love others, unconditionally accept others if we are selfish? How can we do that, right? So therefore, generosity is so important. And when I say generosity, I don't mean material, being generous with just materials. But as you all know, generosity is threefold, right? The first, being generous with materials, and then being generous with the Dharma, or through the Dharma, sharing the Dharma. And then the third, I think, generosity of giving fearlessness, something like this. So this third type, I think, is very important. To help someone who has fear, to take away the fear. This is, I think, it's a very practical form of practicing generosity. Fear, of course, the biggest fear, I think, many people, we feel, is the fear of, I think, being alone, the fear of being alone. This is a very strong fear that I think, His Holiness would say, we human beings, we are social animals. And as we are social animals, naturally we have this fear of being left alone. So if we can practice this third form of generosity, then I think we are then really benefiting. We are bringing some joy, some state of fearlessness, the joy of being free from that fear. If we can bring that joy into someone's life, then what is a better way to practice generosity? So, as someone who follows or who tries to follow in the footsteps of the great teacher, the Buddha, then I think if you are a part of a Dharma community, then this is a wonderful opportunity to practice generosity. Helping someone, offering support. It doesn't matter how big or how many the numbers, they don't matter. But the most important thing is that as long as you do that, as long as you give support, that is enough. We have to start somewhere. We have to. And we don't worry about whether you're doing it correctly or not. Don't worry about that too much. The point is, you have to just simply do it. You have to extend your helping hand without any hint of arrogance, of superiority, like this, as it is mentioned, Because why it is mentioned, why our teachers say it like this, is that in the context of practicing generosity, it is easy that we can become a little arrogant in our practice by virtue of being generous. There is that risk. So therefore, to practice generosity out of humility, this is very important, very important. Otherwise, with some hints of arrogance, then, or other worldly thoughts, then we would say the 8 worldly dharmas, then there is the danger that our form of generosity could very well become that, just a worldly practice. So like this, I think we have to approach our challenges. In time of this kind of challenges, in our interaction with fellow human beings, our fellow Dharma siblings, Dharma sisters and brothers, especially if this other person and oneself had together received, let us say, highest Yoga Tantra teachings, then you are, I think, like Vajra brothers and Vajra sisters, right? So it's very important to, I think, practice mindfulness. This is very important. And as the great teacher George Adisha had said that when alone, watch the mind. When among others, watch the speech. So if we can take something from that short but profound teaching, then I think it helps in overcoming some of the hurdles that we face, the challenges that we face. It would help in overcoming some of our hurdles when it comes to our human relationships, Many of our problems they start as something quite small, and then in our mind, they become huge. They become very big. Speech is a very interesting phenomena. Speech, Even though we say speech comes from the mind, but in some situations, speech can alter the mind. How we verbalize something has an effect on our mind, on our emotions, on our feelings, and so forth. So we have to be mindful with our speech, how we use words. These are sort of like little tools that we can use in order to not fall into these lapses. Because it is so important to have harmony in Dharma communities. And it is not only the responsibility of the teacher, but really it all comes down to you. You are the most important person in this community. And if all of you can recognize that, can see the contribution that you are making in this community, then I think it will give some joy. It will give, I think, some reason to why you should continue to practice the Dharma. When was the last time Lama Zopa Rinpoche visited Maitreya? 2015. And I think next month Rinpoche will be giving the Vajrayogini blessing, and then also the retreat in France. This is great. How wonderful. So it's very important that we do not forget the advice, the instructions, the guidelines that our lamas have shared. This is so important, to always keep that in your heart and to recognize how this Dharma community is very much contributing towards that, towards benefiting sentient beings in a positive way. So, this is why it is so important to always support Dharma centers, to always support the Guru through the Dharma center. In the Tibetan monasteries, we function, right? I think sometimes, of course, it's a little different because there you have a monastic community, a whole community living there, 24/7 together in a way, right? Whether here, you have to, you live and you have your own houses like this, and then you gather here once in a while. But then it doesn't matter so much about those backgrounds. But the important thing is that when you're here, then it is important to, I think, reflect on the teachings, even when you're not in the lakang, even when you're not in the lakang, when you're not in front of the altar. It's very important to reflect and try to bring the teachings to life. Otherwise, otherwise the teachings, they are just there in the book, right? And it is up to us to make those come to life. So we have to if there's one thing that's maybe more difficult to understand or realize than emptiness, then I think it is the human mind. We are so complicated, aren't we? But at the same time, it's quite simple. It is, if one can bring oneself to the basis of the mind, then it will be more harmonious. The way will be more easy. One has to bring one's own mind to the very basic foundation. Whenever there is a problem in the world, and if we are very much part of this problem, then I think the approach should be that we should start the initiative and not expect the other party to start the process. We have to take responsibility, or at least some responsibility, and then start the initiative. This is very important, to not wait for the other to make. Excuse me? Can you please say it? Move. Thank you. Almost like a chess. It's like playing a chess, right? So one has to start the move, right? So like this. Then His Holiness, I remember when visiting the monastery, he said that we have to engage in more social work, like the Christians. We have to engage in more social work, said His Holiness. So this is very important. I said this somewhere, and I might have taken His Holiness's comments out of context. And the way I said it was that when I said we, I meant more like Buddhist. We Buddhists should do more social work, like our Christian sisters and brothers and sisters. Then there was one question. He's of course from Singapore, and he was quite disturbed by my comment. He later came up and said, "What do you mean? That's not true. For example, most of the big Tibetan monasteries in South India, it is the Singaporeans, it is the Malaysians, it is the Chinese who have supported those monasteries, those big projects." And then later, in Singapore, he showed me these different places, Chinese Buddhist centers. And he would point and say, they engage in much social work. And it's almost like he was reminding, then he would say, "Oh, it's such and such, this is a temple," and then he would say, and then they do lots of free medical camps, etc. like this. I was glad that I was proven wrong. But of course, when His Holiness said it, then it was in the context of when His Holiness said we have to do more. Of course, I think it was from the Tibetan monasteries, that the Tibetan monasteries, we should engage in more of this social charity like this. But recently there are many Tibetan monasteries that are also starting to do this. So that's good. And His Holiness would say that when we try to practice compassion, we should begin with the person next to us. We should begin from there. If we are going to practice compassion, then we should share our compassion with the person next to us. And then move from there. Start from there. If we are not able to share our compassion with the person next to us, the person in this room, then simply saying, "May all sentient beings be happy," it's just empty, right? Those become empty words. So this is so true, that the people that we know, these are the people that we should first try to practice our compassion with. This is so important. It is true that not all people are perfect. When you spend time with someone, at some point you will see some mistakes. You will perceive some mistakes, right? But we should be careful enough that seeing those mistakes will not harm the relationship. Seeing the mistakes in the other person, we should not let that perception distance us from the other person. This is very important. We have to be realistic, so we have to accept the other person's mistakes or flaws. But at the same time, that is not good enough of a reason to why we should distance ourselves from the person mentally. So like this, I think we have to approach. We have to think. In our community, we have to acknowledge that each people have their own point of views. This is the first thing that we must accept. Because they have a different view, therefore they might have a different suggestion. They might have a different solution, right? So it's important to have a consensus. When we have to work with others, it is very important to have common ground. There will always be some common ground, but as long as the two individuals are not willing to move from their own way of seeing, this is when many times I think this kind of friction happens, right? Or sort of the relationship might break, something like that. By the way, I'm not a relationship expert. But this is something that I can see, and I try to do some experiments. This is important. You can sort of, after hearing the teachings from the teacher, after reading the books, and when you interact with others, when you are living life normally, then you can try to use those techniques that are taught in those texts, right? That are taught by our teachers. You can see if it is helpful or not. At least give it a try. Yeah? Because there is always a solution in our human-to-human relationship hurdles. There's always, I think, something. There is always a common ground. And that's where you build it. As long as you have common ground, then there is some hope that not only that the other person might change, but that you and the other person will change and move away from sort of really holding on to something, from this tense grip on something. So this is what we have to do, is that we have to let that go and try to come to a consensus. That is so important when we are working together, right? When we are working together. And humility is a wonderful technique. This is so important. This has to do with the view that I was talking in the first place. That if we do not change our mode of apprehension, our way of seeing things, then we are bound to have problems down the road. So we must change how we think, how we see ourselves, right? It has to do with, I think, ignorance, how we term it like that, ignorance, or maybe ego, our ego. So, simply, I think if you have less layers about yourself, then this helps very much. You have to come down to the bare self, Just take out all those layers and all those preconceptions we have, a certain way of looking at ourselves, and certain way of looking at ourselves in society, in relation to others, and comparing, the comparisons, all of that. This affects all of those little emotions, that little way of thinking will have an impact in our behavior, in our interaction with others, in our relationship with others. So we have to always try to link all the problems that we perceive, those are just the symptoms, right? So we have to somehow be able to link those to our way of looking at ourselves and how we view others. So I think this is, again, very important, that we have to, this is something from the Dharma that we can try to bring when we have to work with our friends, our fellow human beings. So important, yeah. Yes. So, sometimes then, as we say it, the self-cherishing mind, then we need to work on that. We have to work on our self-cherishing mind. Very important, just as it is mentioned, just as Shantideva said, that all suffering arises from the self-cherishing. It's the result of self-cherishing mind. This is very profound if you reflect on this verse. So like that, I think. And then I think you have something like group discussions here, don't you? Right? Group discussions during the teaching. Okay. So I think this is quite a good thing. In the monastery, we have group discussions, and it's not only receiving teachings from the teacher, but then we have what we call debate, and there it is quite interactive, right? And I think this is important. So what I've noticed is that it could be a cultural thing, but I think it would be a good thing to know, is that in the monasteries, we know most of our fellow monks. We know where they come from, who their friends are, what they like, what they don't like. We are like friends. And we are very direct with each other. And there are we tease each other a lot. So in some monasteries, they have like this old tradition of teasing each other and giving each other like hard time, some hard time. So what they would do is that I heard there was one like it was like a trend in that monastery. So the trend was that they would, when the opportunity arises, then they would try to hide the other monk's phone, his mobile phone. So that was trending for a while. That was like a favorite pastime. But then later, there was a new trend. Yeah? So this trend was that, what they would do. So sometimes, of course, the monks, we have like a public kitchen. But sometimes the monks, they will cook for themselves, right? So in their rooms, they have a small kitchenette, and then they will cook something. And what the monks would do is that they will come and say, "Oh, you are required. The disciplinarian called you." And as the monk leaves, then they will hide his cooking pot. They will take away his whole food. So they will all, of course, call this when he's about to eat. So then they will take all of his food away. And then there goes his lunch, right? So in our community we do this kind of. There's lots of teasing going on, and it's all taken without any offenses, right? And we are very direct with each other. We put each other down a lot, and it's absolutely fine. We don't take it personally. What this does is that I think it builds our tolerance level when we are used maybe like harsh words or unpleasant words like this. It's almost like we are developing some immunity, right? I haven't seen that in the West, at least not where I've been to, right? Don't. So, of course, this is, one could say, cultural, but then on the other hand, is it really cultural? It's here, right? It's here, and I don't know, I think this could be one thing, that if we can learn these skills, the skill of hiding someone's phone away for 5 hours or something like that, if we can do this, okay, you better hold on to your mobiles. Then I think, good tips, practical tips. So like this, I think, we should of course take life seriously, but then we shouldn't take life seriously, right? So we have to draw the lines. It's wonderful, when you came to guide me here, and I saw that you had your incenses, and it was also lit. But then I had some apprehension, because here in the West, one is very careful with lighting fire in the house, right? But then, of course, you were doing it because you wanted to do it proper. But then here, as long as you come and escort me with an incense, I'm perfectly okay with that. It doesn't need to be lit, right? It doesn't need to be, because we have to, again, adjust. So these kind of things, I think we can adjust. But hiding mobile phones, we can also do it here. It's not as if we hide our friends' mobile phones that the fire alarm would go off. It wouldn't, right? It won't, right? Unless there's a, I don't know, hide the mobile phone alarm around here. I don't know. So we have to be skillful, yeah? We have to be skillful. It's interesting for me because I visit different communities in the West, and each community has a different way of doing things. And this for me is very interesting. And why they do things in different ways is very much related with, I think the relationship that the students have with the teacher. Very interesting. For me, going to different communities, it is perfectly fine for me when you don't do it so Tibetan, right? It's perfectly fine with me as well, you know. Sometimes, with all this kind of the Tibetan way of showing respect, it's wonderful, especially the motivation, and if it brings some, I don't know, something special, if it makes it special for the people, that's all wonderful, right? But then I also feel that when one has all this like predetermined way of doing things, how to behave in front of the Lama, when you have this, it's almost like a protocol in itself. And when you have these protocols, then I think it creates a distance, from the student and the teacher, from these two human beings. I think it creates a barrier. Yeah? So this is something that concerns me. Ideally, we should have a bit of both, I think. A bit of both. There should be a certain level of openness between the Lama and the students, between the teacher and the students. When you have a student-teacher Dharma relationship, in the context of Dharma. There should be a certain level of openness. Otherwise, this becomes, I think, if the aim of going to Dharma centers and meeting lamas was simply to develop some faith, whatever it is that one feels in this kind of situations, if this was if this was the main aim, then okay, that's fine, we can do it like this. But if the aim was to practice the Dharma, to ask the teacher about the Dharma, and to share the obstacles that, our mental obstacles, etc., like this, if we want to share that with our teachers, then I cannot share that. I cannot share my problems with my teacher if there was if it was very formal between us. This, for me, is very, it's so clear for me, because there are some lamas that I have a very formal relationship, whereas with others, I have a somewhat, it's a more friendly relationship. And in this formal and casual relationships that I have with my different lamas, I am not the one who chooses it to make it casual. The default option from my side is always formal, but it is on, the impetus is on the guru. The guru has to make it formal. The guru has to open. And this makes it, I think, easy for the student to open up also, right? So like this, then I see this kind of things. So due to the kindness of my gurus, in having this kind of relationship, I think then brings some balances. If I had a casual relationship, like a very open relationship with all my lamas, then I think it would be different. I would be different. But having these two mixes, then I think it brings some balance. You can feel, I can feel the good qualities that both these two approaches have, right? So this is, I think, very important to have this kind of balance. And then when we receive teachings from the same Lama, then this, we also do not, when we receive teachings from a teacher, not only are we establishing a guru relationship, but also we are establishing a relationship with all the others in the room as well, right? So this is one thing that I think we have to always keep in mind. To not simply see ourselves as independent individuals, but rather see ourselves as individuals that make this community. Yeah? I think this changes something, looking at oneself as an independent individual, and then looking at oneself as an individual, because we are individuals, we cannot deny that, but we are an individual that makes this community, spiritual community, right? So we have to support each other, because if we ask for support and do not give support, then how can this be a bodhisattva act? This is, I think, it can become quite selfish, if we only want support but do not give support. So, of course, it's not so easy, but we have to work on it. And no matter how difficult the situation becomes, I'm not saying for just us, for anything in particular, but in general, no matter how difficult the situation becomes, we have to always not lose hope. No, this is important to always remind ourselves of the teachings, to think about, I think, something like the Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, So like this. And when we see others making mistakes, then we have to be somewhat relaxed. Let go of that tension. Why react in a negative way, So these kind of things, I think, we have to look inwards, This is what the Dharma is about, right? It's all about looking inwards and how we see the world, how we see the other person, and how we relate to the other person, right? And if we just turn a blind eye onto that, and then, just turn away from others, break the relationship, or try to go to a better place. When I say a better place, I of course mean it like in a better situation. Then this is just like escapism, we are not really facing up to reality. This is a cop-out. A cop-out? So we have to work. We have to work with our mind. We have to work with the mind of others and try to be accommodating. This is so important, so important. And try to accommodate in any positive way that we can, or that we can try to think of. Try to think of a way to work with others, trying to find a way. And this is it's like a common theme in our relationships, in our human relationships. This is important to perhaps not emphasize one's own wants, right? This is exactly what being selfish means, to always put one's own wants first, to prioritize that, right? So, I think the Dharma community is like the lab. That's when we have to test the theory. What we learn in the Dharma teaching, in the teaching session, in our group discussions, those are all theories, right? It is when we are alone, it is when we are working with others, that's when we have to use those theories and put it into practice, and then see it for yourself, whether those theories, whether those are pure theories or they can be more than just a theory. It's like that's when you can test your hypothesis, right, and see if it can stand up to the reality. So for this, of course, it's not easy, but one has to not give up. One has to draw inspiration from the teacher, from the Buddha. And we have all these wonderful stories. For example, if I think something like the Bodhisattva Chayabhattara, when we have some problem, I think it would be a good thing to read that and then try to find the relevant verse that would be most applicable in that time, whatever feeling that you're going through. So, like this we have to work. It's not like we have to go to a counselor or therapist. We don't have to do that. We just have to get out our textbook and then read and contemplate, right? And then work with our minds. So this is, I think, how we have to live. If we can living in the company of others, and if we can bring our Dharma practice into our relationship, that's harmony. You have harmony, right? So this is what we should all try to do, to bring the Dharma, to bring our theoretical understanding to life. And as soon as you can do that, then you are living in harmony. Other problems, they can be fixed, but relationship problems, our inner problems, these are some things that we have to rely on the Dharma. We have to always go back to the reference point. And then try to bring that, try to bring that into our relationship. So like this. Sometimes when we think of Dharma, of course, His Holiness would say, before we really get into the Dharma, first, what is most important is to think about our values, our ethical values. If we try to be a person of good moral ethics, trying to be a person of integrity, I think this can also help in shaping our relationship. Right? So these are some of the things that I think we can think about. We can think, and then we can try to test. We can try to test. And when it becomes a little stressful, then it's always a good thing to de-stress, to, I think, try to take a light-hearted approach. Of course, there are some times when it is not appropriate, but in many other times it's, I think, very appropriate. It's just a matter of it's really one's choice. It's your choice, right? So we have to make that move. It's up to us. And I think that's all I have to say. And now, shall we take a 20-minute break, and we resume at 3:45. And if I may just say it now, I think, so that when we restart, you don't have to think about a question. So when we restart, then I would like to have like a question-answer session, or please feel free to share or your suggestions, whatever, it need not be put in a question form, but whatever you have, I would very much like to hear that. Personally, I'm not too fond of delivering monologues. I prefer interaction, and so maybe we can do that. Yeah, okay, all right.